Good you everyone! We have a new drum library that I want to share with you. So I have the special hat for the special day for the special drum library. Special. It's called Iron Drummer. It's by Stigmatized Productions. You might recall this name before because if you click here, I did a video about their Fotis Bernardo drums a couple months back, which obviously kick ass, and it's no different with the Iron Drummer. However, there's one very specific point about this drum library, Iron Drummer I'm talking about, that stands out above the rest. It's unique, it's awesome, I think you're gonna like it, and let's see if you can guess what it is when you listen to the demo. I hope you enjoyed that demo. It was a lot of fun, and yeah, obviously I'm aware that it sounds a bit like Nile, so how about I just join the club, okay? So the thing that sets this library apart, in case you haven't been able to kind of put your finger on it, is the snare drum. It's high tuned, all right? Now there's a couple things going on right now that lead to some various issues, you know, with these everyone chasing the lowest tuning possible on the snare. I get it, both from a recording standpoint and a sound and mixing standpoint, obviously, because that's what I do, that you can get a nice big fat snare sound and it sounds heavier and all these things. But there are a couple problems, namely, when you tune the snare lower and lower and lower, it gets closer in proximity to the kick drum. And it's very easy to make the kick and the snare sound exactly the same. Really annoying. And with the way the processing is happening lately, I've heard a couple new modern mixes, and the snare drum to me is just clip to shit, round, it just sounds like a doink, and that's not interesting to me. In the case of Iron Drummer, you have a snap, just a swoop, a snap, and it's very high tuned. And with a little bit of compression, I'll go over the processing that I did here. The snare just sounds brutal, like especially this last bit here. There's a lot of character in that. It's unique and it's different, and it doesn't sound like the, you know, what everyone's doing right now, which is the thud, 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 you know, with the type of snare processing that's going on, and I really don't like that sound. This day and age, you know, it's all about trying to find a library or a sound that's different, that's unique. You know, I don't use PB 5150 B30s. I try not to use Tune Track or Easy Drummer because everyone's using that, right? If I'm using Trigger, I absolutely don't use Slate Kick 10 and Snare 12. I just try to find my own sounds, you know what I mean? And that's the really cool thing about looking at libraries like this that are, you know, smaller companies or one-man shops like it is with Stigmatized Productions. Demetrius is just one dude. I think he has a couple people that helps him with graphics and things or put things together, but otherwise it's just him. And this is where all the creativity's at. This is where all the unique sounds are at. It's not really going to be in Tune Track or Easy Drum. Nothing against those companies, by the way. You know, even Ugertone does great things. It's unique. It's different. It fills a different void in the market. It's not just that same sound that everyone's using, you know, with Tune Track and things like this. So I was very happy when Demetrius reached out to me. He is sponsoring the video, by the way. So the Fotis Bernardo video was not sponsored. This one is. He reached out to me and he asked me to do a video for you guys. But I mean, once I heard the library, I wanted to do a video. And let me point out really quick, I do get emails often of people wanting me to look at their stuff. And if you don't see a video about it on my channel, it's one of two things. I don't feel it's useful for you, not useful for me, or I don't like it. If it hits any of these two categories, I don't make a video about it. That's it. So I have turned down numbers of videos saying I just it's not good for the audience, or not for me. Okay, so anytime you see a video of me talking about something, I'm actually using the thing, and it's pretty fucking clear that these drums do sound good. Let's go over the elements of the library here fairly quickly. Okay, it's not a complicated system here. And then let's dive into the mix of how I processed all the bits of the mix. There's actually a little bit of a twist that I'm not telling you guys yet. You're just gonna have to wait until we get to the processing part to learn what that twist is. All right, here is the main mixer page. It's pretty much the same as it was from Fotis Bernardo. It's the same design. All the samples are different. Okay, the snares have been completely resampled and all these things. These are not just tuned. It would be impossible to use a drum library where you're just tuning the snare this high up. It just wouldn't sound right. So if you click on the item here, you have all the options of different snares that you can choose from, which are numerous. And just like Fotis Bernardo, you have a raw version. So here's the center version. This is the snare I'm using. And here's the raw version of it. Okay, and you'll notice that there's so much character in these higher tuned snares. There's ping, there's ring, there's some stank on these things. There's some character. It's not just a you know. Yeah, I like this skank. I like it. I like this sound. Same thing with the free floater here. Look at the extra stank on there. It's just there's more personality on that snare. People are gonna remember that sound more so than the overclipped, round type of snare sound that's happening recently, you know, in mixing trends. Got lots of other snares here. Look at that Tama. Just, look at that. So all these snares are very snappy, have a lot of personality, have a lot of skank on them. Skank is the right word. Yeah, a lot of skank, a lot of stank. All right, and they're gonna poke through a mix, and it's gonna make you sound different. That sounds so good. Just a little bit of compression on that, by the way, and like I said, there's a little bit of a twist. I'll tell you what it is later. Just let's get through the rest of here. The rest of this, if you remember, Fotis is just similar. You can pick the processed or raw of each tom or each other shell here. You've got some different hi-hat selections, crash selections, China selections, and the ozone selections, and a ride. Okay, you've got a bunch of different selection of cymbals that you want to use here. It's really easy to audition them. Just click on the cymbal and you can audition the articulation. Very simple to audition the articulation. You can have a really quick idea of what it can sound like instead of having to load it in and then try to put in some MIDI and try to hear all the different articulations. They're all right here. Very simple to use. Self-explanatory here. Want to make one extra mention about the ADSR engine here. Remember that you can use these knobs to basically control sustain. So if you have cymbals that are going on top of each other too much, or you have tom sustain that's going on too much, you can control them with these knobs here, which I did in the Fotis video. You can check that out. The mixer page, again, it's all pretty much the same setup here. Nothing new or out of the ordinary. You can click each mixer track here, and then you have a selection of effects for that track. I mean, it's really impressive, all the work that you can do inside the plugin here. You can create a pretty in-depth preset version of what you would want, and then that's something you could load and then do the last little bit of processing in the DAW itself. I choose not to do this. I just do it in the DAW, and to be quite honest with you, they sound so fucking good that I don't touch them in the instrument itself. I just do a little smidge of processing in the DAW, all right? So in this particular instance, I decided to go with authentic routing, which means that I am making use of the overheads and rooms, and the cymbals track will be mute. If you just want an express mix where what that means, all the shells are on tracks and then you have the cymbals on a track, that's what the express mix will do. It's a little bit easier to mix, but it does sound a little bit different, but it's not that bad. All right, mixer selector up here, don't forget about this. This is very important. If you go to mic mixer, you get some extra options. For example, if you just click on the item down here, the faders will change and you can manipulate how they work with the overheads and in general with the overheads and rooms. Additionally, you have an ability to drag and drop a sample for the kick or snare, and it has the two most important things that you need when you try to blend the snare, which is tuning and phase. So when you drop your sample in here, check the phase right away to make sure that you're not canceling out low end, and then you can tune it up or down just a little bit to make it work better together. And then obviously your kick sample fader here, same thing with the snare. Fantastic, you really don't need anything more than that. Awesome that it's in here. It just makes this library even that more useful. One thing that I did do here though is I did spend some time changing the volumes of the overall crash, splash, and China in the global volume here of the overheads and rooms and bleed and comp. And I did that with the mix playing. Basically, I didn't want to have the cymbals too loud or poking through too much. So when the mix was playing, I adjusted these volumes on the fly. That's why they're not all the same. 4, 3.5, 0, 3, 1.5. So these are all when the mix was playing. So I could get an idea of, get a nice balance of the cymbals. What I wanted to do there. The last thing I should mention, by the way, are, just like with Fotis drums, the absurd number of grooves that you get are in the thousands. In the thousands. If you don't believe me, go to the store page and read the information. I think with this particular iteration of the library, it's somewhere around 4,000 grooves. That's ridiculous and blows my mind, okay? It's all about songwriting, getting your ideas out there faster. And if you have these grooves and then you compare them with something like Loudstack metal MIDI grooves, you have 5,000-6,000 grooves to write your music with, and you don't even need to write a note of MIDI. It's pretty awesome. Now, there are some other specific Greek style here that I really didn't get into. I really found them interesting. It seems to be some folk music, some Greek specific style music, which use very high tuned snares. Dimitris kind of just basically said straight up it's more geared towards people in Greece or Greek who are into this kind of funk Greek style. So it's not really geared towards the metal people. However, he included them anyway because some of the beats are interesting, they are different, and honestly, they could lend themselves to metal in unique ways. So here they are. There's a shitload of them, just an absolute fuck ton of extra MIDI that you can go through and experiment. One might turn out pretty good. These other ones here are mostly the same from what we looked at with Fotis, so I'm not going to go over this again. But it's very easy to use these. Click what you want. Let's just go metal, right? 220, great. Pick what you want. It's up here. You can press play. All right, and then you would just literally click and drag them onto the DAW. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to mess up the session. All right, very simple to use. That's pretty much the overview here of the instrument. It's simple, easy to use. By the way, I think I forgot to mention this straight away from the beginning. Free Kontakt player compatible. You do not need to have the full version of Kontakt. So you don't need to buy Kontakt and then buy Iron Drummer. Iron Drummer works in the free Kontakt player 100%. So you don't need to buy anything extra. And lastly, you do get TCI files with it. So you can use the snare for other projects on other mixes if you just want to use Slate Trigger. So that's the instrument. Let's talk about mixing it, all right? Now, I told you there was a little bit of a twist here, all right? And the twist is that this entire mix that I did is Cubase stock plugins and free plugins. There's not a single proprietary plugin here for mixing, all right? Obviously, the drums and the bass instrument. We got some synth sounds, okay? And obviously, I reamped the guitars of my Angle Savage here. But I'm talking about mixing, all right? As long as you have decent sounds to work with, you can get a great result with basic mixing knowledge. And so let's go over how I mix this. Let's start with the drums. Here we are with the kick. If we solo it, it sounds like a kick drum. Very punchy, a bit more high tuned. I really like this higher tuning with this library. I think it just punches and hits harder and just gets out of the way of all the instruments trying to be in the low end, right? So we have two instances of EQ here. Studio EQ, which is just a stock EQ in Cubase. And I will explain, what I'm trying to do. So when the kick is playing, obviously there's a whole crap ton of, we'll call this low mid energy. This is normal for the kick. You generally want to scrape some information out of this area of the kick drum because it's getting on top of the snare and also masking the bass. So this is pretty much just an area of the kick drum you want to experiment getting rid of. So I'm doing a basic cut in the low end, just low mid scoop here. It's pretty significant, okay? And then a little bit of extra clickety clack for the top of the kick drum. Very subtle, all right? Now, one thing I noticed that with this drum library, the kick is very punchy and it's still subby. I don't know how he managed to do that. So in a secondary EQ, I'm actually doing a low shelf to just get rid of some extra low end information to kind of even it out a little. You can see how it gets a bit more like thubby, you know, not punchy and tight, but more thubby and round with the shelf is disengaged. So I'm looking more for tightness and punch, you know, especially with this particular style where it's quite fast on the kick drum rolling, right? So just basic EQ here, that's all I did. And then we have the kick that ends up sounding like this. So haven't changed the kick drum sound, just molding it a little bit to fit better for us. Now if we go to the snare drum, this is the great one right here. Man, that sounds so good. So without all the processing, sounds like this. Let's just go to and then with processing. So some nice stank on that, love it. So we start with basic EQ again, right? Here, rolling off the low end that we don't need. And then, now you gotta be careful because these snares are higher tuned, right? And the point of the higher tuned snare is a bit more personality. So you're gonna have some ring and you're gonna have some boing in there. But you wanna keep some of it, right? Because by itself, you know, maybe it's a bit annoying. You can hear a bink, 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 but in the mix, that completely disappears. And all you're left with is like a musical dynamic that just sounds cool and different, yeah? So try not to neuter the snare too much with this in this particular case. I'm taking care of some resonance here, a little tiny bit that, yeah, I didn't like that much, and I'm kind of just trying to tone it down and trying to keep it mud-free and clear. All right, so that's the first EQ. Second EQ is I'm just trying to hype it up a little bit. Generally not the best idea because you can make the snare sound pretty shitty. I mean, like cheap, right? Not just like a bunch of white noise. But it worked in this instance. And, you know, why make it more complicated if it doesn't need to be complicated, right? Now here is the winning move right here. The winning move, which is this vintage compressor. Again, this is just a stock Cubase compressor. I guess it's based on a Neve. If we look at the controls here, I don't know, I don't care. All I'm doing, let's solo that. I'm doing not a lot of extra compression. Pretty much, I just adjusted the attack right to the point where I started to get some snap into the snare drum, and then adjusted the release so that, you know, it was getting out of the way before the next hit of the snare, just so that I have some depth and punch and power into it. and then I adjusted how much input. I didn't want to do a lot of gain reduction here, so I just kind of listened to where it sounded best to my ear and adjusted it from there. So without the compression, you can hear all the potential it has in there. Like, it's very well sampled, but then you put this compressor on there, the balls are just like, oh man. So just a smidge of compression here, stock Cubase compression, no big deal. And then I have the stock RoomWorks SE. So this isn't even the big dog, big daddy Cubase stock plugin for reverb. It's just the as bare bones as it can possibly get version reverb. A little bit of pre-delay here, 1.2 seconds, mix of 20%, done. So that's that. Just adds a bit of size to the snare drum a little bit, and obviously a little bit of a tail, so we can cover up a little bit of space in the mix. Sounds good. For the individual toms, I didn't do anything. This is pretty much a trend for me when it comes to drum libraries. For the most part, the direct mics and toms are usually fine, okay? Don't really have to mess with them at all. I'll go to the toms group, and as you can see here, I'll do an overall kind of more of a shaping EQ, you know, a bit more brightness, maybe a bit less low end, but I'm not going in every single tom and going, you know, in recorded toms, completely different story, but when it comes to sample toms, typically it's not necessary. You'll end up neutering the sound too much, they'll get too hollow and then they won't sound right in a mix. In this particular case, I just went to the toms group and worked on it group-wise for overall shaping. So I took a little bit of the mids out and the low mids here. I dump out some low end energy. Once you get a lot of fast tom playing, the notes can the frequencies can build on top of each other, and it can just create a resonance, and then it builds over in that particular range. Not that it sounds distorted, but it'll just bubble up and it'll kind of just poke out of the mix a little bit too much. So pulling out the low end helps deal with that. You don't really have a lot of fills going on here anyway, and there's nothing really consecutive where there's a big long tom roll, but it helps keep things in check. All right, there's a little bit of extra attack on the high end, and again, low end cleaning up and taking out some low end energy so we don't have any buildup. Last thing I did here is just a gate. It is what it is, and that is just to clamp down on the sustain a little bit. So it kind of sounds funny by itself, but in a mix, the last thing you want is dun dun dun, you know, bleeding into the rest of the song. Especially with the lower toms, because the sustain might wobble like this, and that'll make the mix feel like off balance and off kilter, and you won't understand what the fuck's going on, and then it'll mess with the compressors. So just cut it off with a gate. I've found, especially with drum libraries, that just a gate on the drums, or excuse me, the toms group will typically be just fine. There. Now it sustains just enough to go into the next note here. So I set the release and the hold time's pretty short, but I set the release time and everything to pretty much last one measure. Well, one measure being 4/16 notes, because it'll be enough of a sustain where it'll hold that space, and then when we hit the next note, it'll be cut off. So it'll be like a natural point because the transient is hitting, and then that thing will be going away, but you'll be listening to the transient and not necessarily listening to the sustain. Kind of a little bit of a cool little trick. That ended up sounding like this. So sounds totally fine. Whereas solo, it might sound a little bit of a little abrupt, but it's fine. Now we have hi-hat and ride. These are classic spot microphone EQ moves here. We are dumping out all of the low end. I mean, I'm going up to like 1,000 hertz here. That's because the Q is it's not very abrupt. If I had a Q of like 48, I might go 48 dB per octave. I might go to only like 500 or something like this. But basically, we are getting rid of everything that we don't need here. In spot microphones and hi-hats, if you have a very boxy or woofy hi-hat, it's because you have too much low end in it. Now, let me show you what I mean. So that's with the EQ engaged. Here it is without. Okay, so you see without, it's more boxy. That's the crap that we want to get rid of, right? Now you can hear when you're soloing a hi-hat like this, you can hear every articulated detail, and not every problem can be addressed. There's some spiky frequencies in here. Now, yes, if you have soothe, you could use soothe, and you can do dynamic resonance processing, and that would help deal with things, but we're just using stock plugins here and free plugins, and I wanted to show you that even if you can't use soothe, you can't deal with all these single minute problems like all the harshness. Stuff like this will get buried in the overall mix. The main thing is to take care of the major problems here. So you're taking care of the major problems, so at least those are addressed, and everything else can kind of, you know, get frequency masked and worked and massaged into the mix, and you're not really going to hear it. All right. Same thing with the ride cymbal, which is a little bit different. Go to the ride cymbal here. So we have the ride cymbal. It's the same exact concept, okay? Same exact concept. When we are EQing it, we want to get rid of all this low-end, nasty low-end information. With the ride, it's a little bit easier usually because it's just one cymbal, not two cymbals being smashed together like with a hi-hat, so you get a lot of extra harsh resonances, and then like the pieces of metal will like barely touch, and then they'll sizzle and blah blah blah. Generally with the ride, you just got the one ride. It's all about how the person played it. So same thing here, just dunking a lot of all this low end information and mids that we don't need, that makes the ride sound honky and round. Check this out. So with this, without EQ, it sounds like this. With EQ, right? So with the EQ, see how much more articulated and variety it sounds. Without the EQ, it's very masked, so really muddy. Well, that's not what we want. Plus, all those frequencies are going to get into everything else, and we want to heighten the ride. We want to bring out the ping, because I like a nice pingy ride. Get rid of some resonance, but the main thing is dump all that low end that makes it sound muddy and shitty. Okay, moving on to the cymbals track, which we're not using because we use the authentic routing option. Now we have overheads, drums. It's as simple as you think it is, guys. Just getting rid of low end, dumping out some of the mids, a couple of resonance here, and then try to tame the highs a little bit so they're not so harsh. So when it comes to just using EQ, I'm finding that, you know, a lot of people are, I'm getting questions from a lot of people, what plugin should I use for this? What plugin should I use for that? What should I do with this? What should I do with that? Part of mixing a song is understanding that you can't fix everything. Not everything can be fixed, nor should it be fixed. If you are to fix everything, you run into the territory of just making your mix boring and bland. And I will go on record and argue that a great genre that has shown what a perfect mix sounds like, that's perfect in every way, is metalcore, and metalcore is fucking boring. Perfect mix, perfectly engineered, everything's perfect, amazing, perfect, and it's perfectly boring. So there is something to be said where not everything can be fixed, which is okay. So you should worry about the major the major mix breaking issues that are causing the mix to sound like shit. So in this case with the overheads are obviously fine. So I'm just like, what do we need to do here? We need to shave off some of the lows, the mids. There's a little bit of harshness here on top, and it's a little bit bright for my taste. Done. That's it. Let's solo this. So we're not doing a big, huge difference to the EQ. We're just shaping it slightly, getting it to where we want it to be. And that's all you need to do, especially with programmed drums, okay? When you have a good room with good overhead microphones and programmed drums, these are the kind of moves that you can do. When you record your own stuff, obviously it's different, okay? But the point is that you're only trying to fix what's necessary, you know, so that it's not a groundbreaking issue in the overall mix, right? Same thing with the rooms. Now with the rooms, you know that you don't want to have the low end, and you know that you can really dig out a lot of the high end, because there's a lot of harshness there, and you can concentrate on having fat shells, which is what I've done. I'm concentrating totally on making sure the shells sound cool. I'm digging out a lot of high end, because without this EQ, it sounds like this. All that high end energy is going to get in the way. It's going to mask things, and we just really don't need it. We just want the shell tone in the rooms. And to be completely honest, in metal, especially with BPMs like this, the rooms are going to get turned down quite often for more of an upfront sound. So I really didn't care. So I was just like getting rid of the low end, getting rid of the high end. Nah. So it wasn't a big deal to me. We have the bleed track, which I did nothing but turn it down. Bleed is exactly what it sounds like. Just the bleed of all the different instruments coming together. I didn't touch it because I didn't feel like I needed to. Let's go to the next one. Top, same thing. Now this is where a lot of the punchiness is coming from. And all I decided to do is just make sure it's not too bright. And I'll keep the punchiness of all the shells. So just make sure it's not too bright, and then leave it alone. And you know, like, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, guys. You don't have to go to every single track and try to be like, what do I do? Let's do some cool, slick, side chaining, fucking just sometimes just roll off the high end. Sometimes just notch a harsh frequency. Sometimes just turn it down. That's the art of mixing. It's not like, how fucking complicated can I make? Oh, I saw Sturgis do this thing with that way, and then when he did like this, and he went like that, and yeah, that does work sometimes, but 98% of the time, just turning it down is probably the answer, or a basic EQ move is probably the answer. And in time, when you mix a lot, you'll come to understand that. All right, the center stick, which is the side stick on the snare, was not used, so it didn't do anything. Reverb didn't do anything. And then now we have the drums bus. And so the entire drum track sounds like this. Right? Obviously the drum programming needs to be on point. So like all of our velocities and things like this are very well taken care of. You know, like every other hit, you know, when you're blasting, you're gonna have a hit that is always louder than the hit right after it. So it's all programmed like this, okay? It's all very deliberately programmed and velocity edited. And no, we're not perfectly on the grid. If I can't see that probably because my camera. No, we're not perfectly on the grid, as you can see here. You know, we are doing everything that's required to make sure that the drums sound realistic. All right, so here we are. We're on the drums bus. Let's go here. All right, we got some automation with the kick drum, because it's, you know, when you start rolling too fast, too much low end information builds up, and that's not good for keeping the low end consistent. So when there's just regular kick hits like this, you see the low end right here, consistently right here. All right, so we're keeping it pretty much in this area. Go. So we're keeping it pinned and under control as much as possible. Without this, the low end will be coming all the way up here to like plus 6 dB. It's not what you need. Then it would go into the mastering compressor. It would clamp down on your mix, and you want to understand what the fuck's going on. So automation, volume automation on your kick drum, vitally important. So here are your drums. Basic EQ for overall shaping, which I didn't even use, right? Typically, when all the elements come together, you still might have some honk or some upper mid-range nastiness that you can pull down in general. Didn't have to do that here. All I did was use the vintage compressor again for overall mix glue, and it's a very classic setting. You know, 30 millisecond attack. What is this? 50 release. I think this is like one of what's his name? Joel Wanasek's like magic settings that I'll try, and it seemed to work. Again, just bringing that extra little bit of punch and snap and body and balls to the drums. Not a lot of compression at all, and once again, just stock Cubase compressor, okay? And this is just an analyzer that I love using. Helps me understand what I'm doing. So there we are. Pretty much low end and the snare are equal, so they're equal in not necessarily volume, but energy, and that's pretty much a thing that I like to see. All right, so pretty much when it comes to drums, as you can see here, it's nothing out of the ordinary. It's basic EQ pretty much along the board with a little bit of compression shaping with these drums. Very simple to use. So what's the point of going through that? I just wanted to show you that, you know, when it comes to Black Friday, when it comes to this kind of type of year, and when it comes to sales, I am of the opinion that buying drum libraries or orchestral libraries or sound banks, sounds are always a good investment, because these are different sounds that you can use to create different sounding music, right? Do you need to buy FabFilter Pro Q4? Probably not. All right. I will admit that I am much faster using FabFilter after all these years, and I definitely prefer using it over the Studio EQ because I only got, you know, 5 EQ moves that I can do. And actually, I'll be honest with you right now, this is the Frequency 2 EQ that comes with Cubase Pro, and it does everything that FabFilter can do. I mean, obviously, aside from the resonance spatial things that it's saying that it can do now, but we can do everything in this plugin. So I can do linear phase, I can do dynamic, I have a threshold with a ratio attack and release. This even FabFilter 3 didn't even have this. This is just a new feature in FabFilter 4. Okay, keyboard, you know, I can solo every single filter by itself. So this is a stock plugin that essentially has every single feature that FabFilter Q4 would have. So do you need to buy a FabFilter Q4? Probably not. Other than that, I think if you started using Frequency 2 all the time and you just got used to it, you would become very fast and you would know what to look for. But the point is that it's not necessary to buy all these different plugins all the time. The plugins are not the thing, all right? As I've talked about in my mixing metal workshop, which is on sale on my website right now, by the way, for the end of year sale. Once you have a process, once you know how to use the plugins and how to EQ and compress, that's pretty much 98% of mixing and fader and panning. Honest to God, you know. So you can buy other plugins that make things faster or reduce the amount of steps that you need to do. Those are great investments. So, but when it comes to sounds, you know, in particular drum libraries, it's always a good investment, okay? Iron Drummer, it's on sale right now. I think it's $70 for over 4,000 grooves, all these different sounds, all this capability, these mixer settings. You can do your own sample blending over here with a snare and the kick. You can do different routings, okay? You can change, you can have a raw snare if you want to do your own processing. You have authentic sounding cymbals, and I haven't even gone into, like, because I talked about it with Fotis, but the hi-hat articulations are really nice. All the cymbal articulations are very nice. It's just a very well made, very competent product, and it's definitely a better investment in having a different sound than it would be to, for example, buy a FabFilter Pro Q4, which would be, I think the EQ is like €120 by itself. Now, I have Q4. I love FabFilter, so I buy those things, but that's my choice and my decision. If I had $200 and I had to go A or B, I would go with the drums because it's different sounds and more opportunity to write something that sounds different, and you can practice mixing on this because all of this are just stock plugins, all right? And that goes all through the line, by the way, even with the bass. I didn't do anything different. So the bass, there we go. That's all the processing I did on the bass. Again, basic EQ. And because it's Zero Bass 3, it's already pretty much, you know, dunked out by Submission Audio. I didn't do anything else. I could do extra compression. I could probably put some limiting on here, but I didn't because it sounded fine. When it comes to the guitars, Same thing. I have just EQ on here. Now this is a special situation because we have a bunch of rolling blackouts and things right now here, so I didn't have a lot of time to reamp the guitars, and the tone itself is not that great. I can show it to you. So here's the actual guitar tone. So you can hear that it's got some balls. It's nice. And by the way, I want to mention that I'm using the Joker DS57A6. This is from Valhalla. Awesome IR company. They do really unique, different IRs. Again, IRs. Great investment over just buying an EQ plugin. And these are very affordable. So these are IRs, an angle cabinet with, I forget what the speakers are at the moment. I'm sorry. But they're not V30s. That's the point. It's an angle cab with not V30s, so it's a different sound. And so these are all going through this particular cabinet and speaker being reamped. And I didn't have a lot of time, so I kind of had to reamp pretty quick. So this is the tone that I came up with. It's being reamped through the Angle Savage 120 Mark II. And so that's what I did. So I just reamped it really quick, and then I had to save the session. And then once power came back on, I started mixing it. And I was pretty disappointed at first. I was like, shit, maybe I should try reamping this. But again, to get a better setting. But I was like, you know what? Let's see what I can do. So I have just 3 instances of stock EQ and then a stock multi-band compressor. All right, so let's walk through this. All right, so here we go. So obviously taking care of the low end here, we have a ginormous what is this, number 2 1K honk nasal coming through. 3 here is 3.3K. It's exactly what you think it is. It's that nasty spitty harsh frequency up top. Now it's kind of hard to hear it because we have this issue right here, the 2K, which we're going to deal in the next, in one of the subsequent plugins. But like, that's kind of how it happens with this EQ. You kind of got to work in steps. Frequency 2, I probably could have done everything in one plugin, but whatever. So I've got Studio EQ, that's the first step. The second step is this bit right here. And here we are, we're taking care of that 2.3K. Let's do this EQ first. So we can listen to this. All right. Yeah. So that's a major switch. So let's go one at a time here. That might freak you out. So what happened here? So there was still too much low end. I knew I wasn't going to use Pro MB. I knew I was going to use a stock multiband, but I wanted to pull out some low end information anyway, so we have the low end shelf. Just pulling a little bit of extra info out of there. Here, this is the secret EQ move that I've talked about before. You can check here in the video. It's many years old that this video is. Basically, 400 hertz or thereabouts helps remove a lot of that honky gunk in the middle mid-range of the guitar that masks it. Let me show you what I mean. So when the mid-range is there, it just sounds like it's underwater. It's like being dunked in the bathtub underwater. You can't hear what's going on. So that EQ move opens the tone a little bit. And then obviously we have that really nasty 2.3 thing going on. Pretty shit, right? But one thing now is when we listen to this in context, the guitar tone wasn't sounding very exciting, right? And I wouldn't call it dark, but once everything was cleaned out and clear, it just sounded a bit dull. And when in doubt, high shelf. So that's where that high shelf comes from. And now it makes a lot more sense, all these EQ moves, right? Okay. We have one final EQ move here, which is just a resonance at 700. Pretty typical situation here. Let's take it out. Below that for you. It's like a milky massing. Alright. I'll exaggerate it and you'll hear it. Very vital spot though. Don't take too much of this out, otherwise you'll kill the energy of the guitar tone. So just enough so it's not annoying, okay? So that's the EQ moves that I made there. I would argue pretty basic shit, alright? Just a couple steps. And then we have the multi-band compressor, which is just replicating the Andy Sneap technique. If you want to learn more about the Andy Sneap technique, obviously you can click, in the cards up there. But here we're just setting the ratio of the release as fast as possible so it gets out of the way. Attack as fast as possible. And we just want to clamp down on the as much as we can. So evening out the guitar performance, and that's it. When it comes to the effects, very simple. Didn't do anything on the individual tracks, but what we are doing here is a little bit of distortion, which adds some extra harmonics, and what it does is it makes it cut through the mix. So without the distortion, it sounds fine. There's nothing wrong with these sounds. Let's see, with the distortion, we're adding some body, some mid-range body into it, and this automatically will just pull it up in the mix and make it cut through. Studio EQ to get rid of low end and low mid. So that's the ironic part of it, right? Like, I'm adding all this distortion to, help it cut through the mix, but then I'm dunking out all the low end and the low mids. Yep, that's how it works, because the guitars and bass are more important in that range than this. All right, but the distortion also has a little bit of sparkle on top, again, which helps it sit on top. And then we have reverb. 4-second delay, 4 seconds on the reverb, 20% mix. More atmosphere, all right? Fantastic. So that's all the individual elements, okay? Now, you're probably thinking, okay, Scott, that's cool. So you mixed everything, with just Cubase and plugins and stuff. That's pretty cool. But I'm sure your mastering chain is your pro-level mastering chain. And the answer is no. The mastering chain is the exact same mastering chain that I showed you guys in a previous video. It's completely free. You can check that out here up in the cards. And also, it's in the metal mixing workshop, of this mastering chain, how to use it, how to set it up step by step, and it's free plugins, okay, except for the Imager. So I'll explain this exact chain here for you and why I'm using it. So the Imager stock Cubase plugin, all I'm doing is from 100 hertz and below, I am making it mono. That's all. Just makes it mono, because we want all that low end to be collapsing mono, and it'll be tighter. We don't want it to be wobbling around. We don't really want a lot of 3D space in the low end. Studio EQ. Wow. We've seen this move before, haven't we? We are getting rid of pretty much the low end that we don't need. With this EQ, I think I'm going up to 32, which, yep, pretty much, we do there. This is the low end Cola EQ cut that I learned. It really helps unmask the low end of the bass and the kick and the guitars and the snare. Let me show you what I mean. So when that EQ is not engaged, it's just muddy, I guess is the way that I can describe it. Let me increase the EQ cut here and you'll see what I mean. Yeah, it's just like cloudy and muddy, and it just gets on top of everything. So a small little EQ cut there opens it up, and yeah, I heard that. Let me know if you guys could hear that, and let me know what you think. And then a very slight high shelf EQ boost for more energy in the high end, right? So that's the EQ. Going into the clipper. Clipper has oversampling on, by the way. And I think most of this is just taking care of the back half of the song. Anyway, I'm not going to play the whole track here to find it, but basically I adjusted this just to the biggest transient peaks, and it's clipping them. And the whole point of doing this is so that I can send this waveform into this mastering compressor as consistently as possible, so the mastering compressor can work very consistently. So there's not like, oh, we have lowing and it just dumps it as hard as possible. Oh, we're fine, and then it's not working. It'll work more consistently, especially with the snare transients. This is as basic bitch of a setting that you can get to. 3 milliseconds attack, 200 milliseconds release, 1.5 dB gain reduction, done. Like, this is just the default. I just changed these settings, didn't do anything. Oh. We're doing 1 dB of gain reduction at the most. This is not where your mix gets loud, by the way. Remember about that. Alright, and then we have loud max. This is where the mix gets loud. And I just set it to where it sounded good to me. I actually don't know what we're at. Let's go to Supervision, which is another Cubase stock plugin. And let's look at our loudness and see where we are for integrated LUFS. I have no clue. So that would be where I would master something anyway. Around -9 integrated LUFS is pretty much what I mastered to as it is. So free loud max limiter, free mastering chain, 9 LUFS, -9 LUFS mix. One last thing I forgot to mention here is there's some automation on the guitars, because we have some harmony bits going on here and the harmonies were getting lost. So I automated these up by like 0.25, I think. Just a little bit to where they aren't getting sucked behind the snare drum. Yep. So that is the mix, okay? And again, the whole point, I guess I'm really making this longer than it needs to be, is that when you invest in something like a drum library, it allows you to spend more time learning how to mix, because you don't have to buy all these different plugins. You know, I know it's hard, trust me. All these Black Friday sales recently, last couple weeks, and now we have the Cyber Monday sale, now we have the end of year sale, now we're going to have the New Year sale, now we're going to have the post New Year sale, now it's going to be the New Year, New You sale. I get it, okay? But if you're going to buy anything and you have a budget, get these drums or a drum library, okay? But this is a very good deal because it's like 70 bucks. Actually, let me check the price right now. Yeah, it's 70 bucks. And actually, if you go on their website, 10% off, especially for you. Sign up to receive your discount. So sign up to their email list, get a 10% discount on an already well discounted library. 120 normally, it's 72 euro right now, plus 10% off. So what is, you know, come on, do the math. That's a ridiculous price for a well done library. You can go through here and listen to all the other grooves and things like this. But yes, the point being that if you invest in sounds, be that an orchestral library, drum library, you can practice mixing, you can make music. And I argue that would be the better investment. So once again, good Yule to everyone. If this is a library that you want to pick up, definitely do so. It's well worth the money. It sounds awesome. It's unique. And you're going to be able to create kick-ass sounding mixes with it with completely free and stock plugins. So click the link below in the description right now. It's not an affiliate link, so I don't receive any commissions on these sales. Only the video was sponsored by Demetrius. Everything else, it's him, and that's fine with me. All right. Main thing is just click the link below, grab these drums, and if you need help learning how to mix, there's the Mixing Metal Workshop, which is also on sale right now. So once again, maybe instead of buying the plugins, invest in new sounds and invest in knowledge. All right, so you can do what I just did with stock and free plugins. All right. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one.